Hello friends, I won't take much of your time. I just ask you to subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
I found out my parents weren't coming to my graduation the same way a lot of people find out bad news these days, through a phone notification that hit harder than any words ever could. While I stood backstage, cap balanced on my head, nerves prickling under my gown, ready to deliver the speech I had practiced for weeks, I got a ping. I glanced down, expecting maybe a good luck text or a last-minute encouragement from my mom or dad. Something simple like, "We're proud of you," or "You've got this." Instead, I saw a smiling selfie. My mother's freshly manicured nails were fanned out like a prize display, her face lit with pride, and my dad was next to her, flashing a thumbs up. The caption, "Kayla's graduation petty girls' day." And just like that, the final brick of hope I'd been stacking for 18 years collapsed under its own weight. See, Kayla is my younger sister by 3 years, but you'd think I was the tag-along. She's always been the golden child, the one with the hair appointments and cheer competitions, and a social calendar booked out like a senator's. And I was the one who didn't make noise. I didn't get in trouble. I didn't need reminders to do homework or lectures to study harder. I just did it. I assumed if I kept working hard, they'd notice eventually. I thought maybe, just maybe, today would be that day. The one where they'd look at me the way they look at her. But that selfie, that stupid, careless post, told me everything I needed to know. I should back up. It's not like this was new behavior. I remember one Christmas, I was maybe 11, Kayla was 8. She got a new iPad and a hoverboard. I got socks, literal socks. My mom made a big deal out of them too. "They're thermal. You walk to school, sweetie, you need warm feet." As if that made up for the fact that they had clearly blown the budget on Kayla's gift haul. But I didn't say anything. I just smiled and thanked them, because that's what I was trained to do. Be grateful, be quiet, don't make a scene. Even when I made the honor roll every semester, they barely looked up from their phones. Meanwhile, when Kayla passed her driver's test on the 3rd try, they threw her a party. When I got accepted into 4 universities, big names too, they skimmed the letters, said good job, and went back to arguing about whether Kayla's spring break trip should be to Cancun or Miami. My entire life, I've watched them pour everything into her, time, money, attention, and I convinced myself it was okay. Because I didn't need it as much. But that wasn't true. Everyone needs to be seen. Everyone wants to feel like their work matters to someone besides themselves. Graduation day was supposed to be mine. I had worked jobs through college, pulled all-nighters studying, even battled through a depressive episode my sophomore year, without telling a soul because I knew, deep down, I couldn't afford to break down. If I cracked, no one would catch me. I was alone in a house full of people who treated me like background noise. And still I pushed. Still I rose, I graduated summa cum laude, and not only that, I was chosen to be valedictorian. I was given a microphone and a platform finally, and they didn't even care enough to show up. So standing there backstage, holding my speech with trembling hands, I looked at that selfie again. I zoomed in as if that would help me understand. My mom's necklace caught the light, my grandmother's, the one she promised I'd inherit. My dad's laugh lines were deep from years of smiling for everyone but me. And Kayla, she looked as blissful as ever, like nothing in the world could touch her. That was the moment something shifted in me. Not anger, not sadness, but clarity. I wasn't invisible because I failed to shine. I was invisible because they never looked in my direction. The announcer called my name. I walked out to polite claps, the gymnasium packed with families holding balloons and cameras, parents wiping tears as their kids stepped up to the mic. I scanned the crowd once, even though I already knew. They weren't there, just empty chairs where I imagined them sitting, and echoes of applause that weren't meant for me. Still, I stood tall. I approached the podium, adjusted the mic, and looked out into the sea of faces. I took a breath, not to calm my nerves, but to steady my resolve. I didn't change a single word of my speech. Not yet. I read it the way I had written it. Honest, proud, full of gratitude for my professors, my mentors, and the classmates who had supported me. But as I neared the end, I felt the words I wanted to say bubbling beneath the surface, pressing against my teeth like they had been waiting all these years for this exact moment. My hands tightened on the paper. I could have let it go. I could have ended with the generic thank you and walked off. But I didn't. I looked up, right into the camera being live streamed for families who couldn't attend, and I said, "And lastly, I want to dedicate this achievement to the people who always believed I wouldn't make it, who thought I was too quiet, too serious, too forgettable. Thank you for the silence. It taught me how to speak. Thank you for the neglect. It made me fight harder. And thank you for not showing up today. It reminded me that I never needed you to shine." There was a pause, just a beat, and then applause, loud and awkward, not quite sure if it was the right response. But I didn't wait to find out. I walked off the stage, calm, composed, and for the first time in my life, not desperate for anyone's approval, I checked my phone. 12 missed calls, all from Dad. When I walked off that stage, the weight in my chest didn't disappear, not exactly, but it shifted into something new, something sharper, almost like defiance wrapped in clarity. And even as the noise of the applause faded into the chaos of families reuniting, balloons bouncing, and moms crying into program, I didn't look around for my parents because I already knew they weren't there. And more importantly, I finally understood that they had never been. Not really, not in the ways that mattered. I made my way outside into the glaring afternoon sun, pulling my phone from the inside pocket of my gown, where I'd tucked it like it was just some minor prop in the ceremony, not the device that would become the trigger for everything that came next. The first thing that hit me was the missed calls, 12 of them, all from Dad. And for a second I thought maybe someone had gotten hurt. Maybe they had been on their way and something terrible happened. But when I tapped to listen to the voicemail, I didn't hear panic or urgency. I heard irritation. His voice was clipped, impatient, like I had inconvenienced him, and all he said was, "Amanda, where the hell is your sister? Call me back. Now." That was it. No mention of my speech, no congratulations, not even a half-assed excuse for missing the biggest day of my life. Just concern for Kayla, as always. It didn't even surprise me, but the speed with which he redirected the spotlight away from me and back to her was almost impressive. Like some kind of reflex, as natural as breathing. I stared at the phone for a long minute, then opened the rest of the voicemails. My mom's was next, and hers sounded more frantic, but not in a way that made me feel like something was wrong. It was the kind of frantic people get when they realize they're about to look bad. "Amanda, honey, we need to talk," she said, her voice high-pitched and unconvincing. "Something's going on with Kayla. Please call us back. We're at the salon. She left in a rush, and we don't know where she went. We saw part of your speech online and, well, can you just call us, please?" That was the moment I realized someone must have been recording. Maybe a teacher, maybe a parent, someone who had their phone out during my speech, caught those last few lines and posted it, probably thinking they were capturing some viral girl boss moment about self-love and proving the doubters wrong. But my parents would have known it was about them. No one else would have understood the specific kind of poison I had laced into that thank you. It was funny, really, how simple the words were. I hadn't even said their names. I hadn't mentioned Mom or Dad or Kayla, or pointed a finger or told a single story. All I did was thank the people who didn't believe in me, the people who never showed up. But that's the thing about guilt. It hears itself even when no one else is talking. I didn't call them back. Instead, I sat down on a low wall outside the auditorium and scrolled through the notifications. The video had already been shared twice on a student-run Instagram account. And I saw a few of my classmates commenting things like, "Damn, she went off and her parents must be squirming." One girl I barely knew from freshman year DM'd me and said, "I always thought you were just quiet, but that speech was iconic." It was surreal, like watching someone else's moment from the outside. I should have felt proud, but all I felt was exhausted. And still, beneath all that, there was this whisper of satisfaction, because for once, they had to hear me. Not because I raised my voice, not because I confronted them or cried or begged for acknowledgement, but because I had finally made myself impossible to ignore. For the first time in my life, I had spoken in a way they couldn't talk over or shut down or dismiss, with a tight-lipped smile and a passive-aggressive comment about being too sensitive. As I walked to the after-party my department was hosting at a nearby park, the calls kept coming. By the time I got there, the number was up to 16. I flipped my phone over and stuffed it in my bag. I didn't want to hear it, not tonight. I grabbed a soda, nodded politely at some professors, and tried to enjoy myself. But even as I chatted with classmates and accepted congratulations, I kept feeling this itch in the back of my mind. The knowledge that something was unraveling on the other side of town. Something involving Kayla. Something that had made my parents panic in a way they never had for me. Later that night, when I finally got home and checked my messages again, there was one new voicemail from my dad. It was shorter than the rest and more urgent. "We can't find her. Amanda, if you know anything, you need to tell us. This isn't funny anymore." And just like that, the power I had felt earlier started to twist into something heavier. Kayla wasn't answering their calls. Kayla had disappeared. And for the first time in my life, I was the one holding the answers. Or at least, they thought I was. By the time the sun dipped low enough to stretch long shadows across the living room carpet, I was sitting on the couch with my phone face down beside me, trying to pretend I wasn't counting the minutes between each new call from my parents, who seemed to think that, somehow, I had orchestrated not only a calculated public humiliation at my graduation, but also the sudden disappearance of my sister, as if I had quietly pulled the strings on some master revenge plan. While smiling politely and keeping my head down all these years, the truth was far less dramatic, and yet somehow more damning. I hadn't done anything at all, and for once, that nothing was echoing louder than any action I could have taken. The voicemails had gone from frustrated to frantic, and though I hadn't responded to any of them, I played each one, not out of concern, at least not at first, but more out of a strange, detached curiosity, like watching a car slowly slide into a ditch while the driver kept pressing the gas pedal, thinking it would somehow climb its way out. My father's voice, usually so clipped and composed, had started to crack around the edges, and my mother, who always prided herself on being the calm one, had resorted to pleading, her words spilling over each other in a way that didn't sound rehearsed or performative, which was new and honestly unsettling. They kept saying Kayla had left the salon in a rush, that she'd seen the video, my speech, and stormed out saying she needed air, and hadn't answered her phone since. I kept going back to that line, "She saw the video," as if it held some clue to a puzzle I hadn't meant to build. I never imagined Kayla would even care about what I said. She had always lived in a world where my existence barely registered unless it intersected with hers in a way that made her life slightly more convenient or slightly more annoying. We weren't close, not by any stretch, but we weren't enemies either. Or at least, I didn't think we were. But the more I thought about it, the more the memories started to string themselves together, forming a story I hadn't bothered to read before. There were so many moments, small, seemingly insignificant ones, where Kayla had lashed out, not in the dramatic way some sisters fight, but in subtle jabs, whispered insults, and icy silences, like the time she told our cousin at Thanksgiving that I liked being alone, because some people just can't handle attention, or the way she used to borrow my clothes without asking and return them stained, knowing I wouldn't say anything because if I did, our mom would just accuse me of being selfish or dramatic. Kayla had always lived like a princess in a house built on quiet sacrifices, and I had willingly laid the bricks. Still, I didn't think she would vanish over a few lines in a graduation speech. Not unless there was something else beneath the surface, something I hadn't seen coming. Around 9:30 that night, the doorbell rang, and my body instinctively tensed. For a second, I thought it might be Kayla, maybe coming to yell or cry or accuse me of ruining her day. But when I opened the door, it was just Officer Benitez, a local cop I vaguely remembered from a neighborhood watch meeting my mom dragged me to during high school. She was kind but firm, The way officers are when they're not yet sure if a situation is a crisis or just a misunderstanding spiraling out of control. She said my parents had filed a missing person report, that they had mentioned me as someone Kayla might reach out to, and that they were worried she had taken off on foot, possibly without her phone, after the incident at the salon. Incident was a word she used carefully, as though trying not to suggest blame just yet. I told her I hadn't seen or heard from Kayla, which was true, and that I hadn't expected to. Officer Benitez nodded slowly, wrote something in her notepad, and said they'd be checking local surveillance footage and Kayla's phone GPS, but so far, no pings. I asked if it was possible Kayla was just angry and trying to make a point, and the officer said, "Sure, teenagers get dramatic sometimes," with a look that made me wonder if she was just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. After she left, I locked the door and stood in the hallway, staring at my own reflection in the mirror above the console table. I looked calm, too calm, like a person watching a storm hit a neighbor's house while sipping coffee in their own. And that scared me, not because I felt guilty, but because I didn't. The truth was, I didn't want Kayla to be hurt or missing or scared. But I also didn't want to be the one to clean up after her again, to carry her fallout like I always had. There was a part of me that resented how quickly the narrative had shifted from my moment to her crisis. And I hated that even now, when I should have been celebrating, I was once again standing in the shadows of someone else's chaos. Later that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed again. This time, not a call, but a text. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. The message was short and strange. "She always wanted to disappear. Maybe you just gave her permission." I sat up, heart pounding, every part of me suddenly alert. There was no signature, no follow-up, just that one sentence sitting on the screen like a loaded gun. And for the first time since this whole thing began, I started to wonder if maybe Kayla hadn't just stormed off in a fit of drama. Maybe she'd been planning something all along. And maybe, just maybe, I had unknowingly lit the match. The morning after the police visit, I sat at the kitchen table with a half-empty coffee mug in front of me and the faint headache of too little sleep and too many spiraling thoughts pressing at my temples, while the house stood still and uncomfortably silent around me, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for someone to say the one thing no one wanted to acknowledge, that Kayla hadn't come home, that she wasn't answering anyone's calls, and that, maybe for the first time in her life, she wasn't where people expected her to be, which felt impossible, surreal even, because Kayla didn't just vanish. Kayla was the kind of person who filled up every space she entered, who made sure people knew where she was and what she was doing, and yet now she was gone. And all that was left in her place was a series of missed calls, a few cryptic text messages, and the slow-burning realization that something was deeply wrong, not just with the situation, but with everything we had ever believed about our family. I don't know what made me go into my parents' room that day. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe anger, or maybe it was that text from the unknown number the night before still buzzing in the back of my mind like a riddle I couldn't solve. But once I was inside, the air felt different, heavier, like the truth had seeped into the walls and was waiting to be found. Their bedroom was always pristine, the kind of clean that doesn't look lived in, with matching nightstands and throw pillows placed just so. But there was one thing I had never bothered to touch. Never even noticed, really. Until that morning, the small locked drawer on the left side of my dad's desk. The one he always kept shut and brushed off with a casual, just old paperwork, whenever Kayla or I had gotten too close. It took me exactly 10 minutes to find the spare key, taped under the drawer of his nightstand, the most cliché hiding place possible. And when the lock clicked open, the first thing I saw wasn't paperwork at all, but a thick manila envelope labeled with Kayla's name in my mom's handwriting, followed by a second folder marked Financials, and underneath that, a printed stack of emails so tightly stapled, they looked like legal documents. My hands shook as I pulled everything out, not because I was afraid of what I might find, but because part of me already knew, had always known, in some deep, guttural place, that there was more to our family's perfect image than met the eye. The first envelope held receipts, pages and pages of them, from therapy sessions, academic tutoring, private coaching programs, and even a life coach based in California, who charged more per hour than I had made working 2 campus jobs combined. There were invoices for retreats, for personal trainers, for things I had never even heard Kayla mention, all dated within the last 5 years. Some overlapped with the years I was scraping together change for groceries, skipping meals during finals because the dining card had run out, and thinking it was just how struggling students lived. My parents had never said they didn't have money, they just said they couldn't afford extras for both of us, and I, being the independent one, was expected to understand that. The second folder was worse. It was a breakdown of 2 accounts, one in Kayla's name and one in a trust, both stacked with more than enough to cover college tuition, rent, and then some. The trust had been established when Kayla was 12, the same year I'd been told we couldn't afford a school trip I desperately wanted to go on, the one all my friends went to without me. They'd lied, not just about being broke, but about everything. They hadn't just favored Kayla emotionally, they had backed it up with money, with security, with choices I'd never even been offered. Then I turned to the emails. They were between my mother and someone listed only as Dr. R, a counselor or therapist. Based on the tone, the messages were all about Kayla, her mood swings, her difficulty coping with expectations, her recurring statements about wanting out. One line in particular stuck with me, burned itself into my memory like a scar. Kayla feels overshadowed by Amanda's independence, and it's creating resentment. She doesn't feel seen. I read it twice, then a third time, my hands clenched so tightly the paper wrinkled. Overshadowed. She didn't feel seen. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. How could the girl who had everything, every ounce of attention, every dollar of support, every goddamn indulgence, be the one who felt invisible? And how could my parents have read that, accepted it, and still kept feeding the narrative that she was the fragile one and I was the strong one who didn't need anything? That's when I realized something even worse. It wasn't just that Kayla had disappeared. It was that I didn't know her at all. Not the real her, the one behind the perfect Instagram selfies and loud laugh and designer bags. I had seen glimpses over the years, mood swings, tantrums, long silences, but I had dismissed them as drama, as manipulation, the same way my parents had taught me to see everything she did. But what if there was more? What if the resentment, the pressure, the weight of being the chosen child had broken her in ways we never acknowledged? I sat there for hours staring at the evidence of a life that had been constructed for Kayla with precision, while I had been left to build mine out of scraps. And yet I didn't feel sorry for her. I felt something murkier, something between pity and anger and a hollow kind of relief that maybe, finally, the cracks were showing for everyone to see. I knew what I had to do. I printed the emails, I scanned the receipts, I copied everything onto a flash drive, and tucked it into my bag. I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do with it. Go to the police, post it online, confront my parents face to face. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the one cleaning up the mess. I was going to make sure they were the ones standing in it. And just as I zipped my bag closed, my phone buzzed again, a new message. Same unknown number. Check the guest room closet, top shelf. My blood ran cold, because whoever this was, they weren't just guessing. They knew. The message sat there on my screen, glowing in the dim light of my bedroom. Plain and unadorned, but somehow pulsing with a weight that made it feel like a trapdoor had just opened beneath everything I thought I had begun to understand. Check the guest room closet, top shelf. It wasn't a suggestion or a question. It was a directive, cold and knowing, and the moment I read it, my heart didn't just race, it clenched, like it was bracing for the impact of something I couldn't name yet, but could feel gathering like a storm just beyond the horizon. There was no reason for anyone to know what was in that room, not my friends, not even Kayla, who hadn't set foot in the guest room since before she graduated high school, and certainly not a stranger texting from an anonymous number, So the only logical conclusion was both the most disturbing one. Whoever had been messaging me wasn't some internet rando playing games. They were close, or had been, close enough to know the physical layout of our house, the habits of our family, and the places we kept things we didn't want others to see. Still, I went. My body moved before my brain could catch up, and within minutes I was standing in the doorway of the guest room, heart pounding in my throat, staring up at the top shelf of the closet like it might come alive and lunge at me. The room itself hadn't changed in years, still smelled faintly of the potpourri my mom insisted on buying in bulk, still held the same twin bed with the outdated quilt my grandmother had sewn, still looked like the kind of space you make livable enough for in-laws, but impersonal enough that no one wants to stay more than a night or two. I dragged over a chair, climbed up, and reached blindly into the darkness above until my fingers closed around something. A box, shoebox sized, with a rubber band holding the lid down, and a yellow post-it note stuck to the side with the single word Amanda scrawled in blue ink I didn't recognize. Inside were photographs, printed, not digital, some of them creased from years of being handled, others pristine, as if they'd been tucked away the moment they were developed. And not just any photos, but ones that made my breath catch in my chest because they were of me. Me at track meets, me studying in coffee shops, me walking to class on campus, always at a distance, always unaware. Some were clearly taken through windows, others from across streets, and the implications of that realization hit me so hard I had to sit down, the chair creaking beneath my weight as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Beneath the photos was a USB drive taped to an index card that said, "If something happens, she deserves to know." The handwriting didn't match my parents', and it wasn't Kayla's either. This was someone else, someone I hadn't accounted for yet. I rushed back to my room, plugged in the drive, and waited as the contents loaded. There were audio files, dozens of them, each labeled with a date and a location, and when I played the first one, I heard a voice, clear, calm, and unmistakably Kayla's. She was speaking to someone she trusted, someone she confided in, and the things she said made my blood run cold. She talked about our parents, about the pressure, the lies, the constant push to be perfect, while I was allowed to struggle, to fail, as if the bar was lower for me by design. She said she hated it, hated that she was held up like a trophy while I was treated like the safety net, hated that every choice she made had to be perfect, or it was torn apart, while I could disappear for days and no one noticed. She said she didn't blame me, but she envied me, deeply, painfully, because while I had learned to survive without them, she had been molded into someone who couldn't even breathe without their approval. But the recordings didn't stop there. In one, she talked about running away, not in a dramatic teenage angst way, but with a level of calculation that stunned me. She had a plan. She had money. She had someone helping her, someone who had been watching me, keeping tabs, possibly at her request. And she said very clearly, "If this goes wrong, I want Amanda to know the truth. She deserves that much." That was the moment everything shifted. Kayla hadn't just run away, she had orchestrated it. And more than that, she had planned to use her disappearance as a detonator, a final act of rebellion that would unravel everything our parents had spent years building. Their lies, their favoritism, their perfect facade. It was all coming undone. Not because I exposed them, but because she did. The girl they coddled, protected, and worshipped had been the one to strike the final blow. I sat there for hours, listening to every file, reading every note, piecing together a story I had never known I was a part of. It was equal parts heartbreaking and vindicating. Kayla had suffered too, not in the same way, not in silence, but in the pressure cooker of being the favorite, the chosen one, the family's investment. And in the end, she'd broken beneath it, just like I almost had. I didn't go to the police. I didn't confront my parents. I didn't need to. Instead, I leaked the contents of the flash drive and the USB to a journalist friend from school who owed me a favor and had a nose for stories that made suburban families squirm. Within days, local media caught wind of the financial discrepancies, the strange disappearance, the lopsided treatment of two daughters, one publicly successful, one privately collapsing, and our family name became something whispered with pity and scandal in the same breath. My parents tried to call. I didn't answer. They tried to explain. I wasn't interested. They lost friends, lost social standing, faced an audit they weren't prepared for, and worst of all, for people like them, they lost the ability to pretend. As for me, I moved out, started fresh. No grand declaration, no cinematic ending, just a quiet severing of ties that had bound me too tightly for too long. A year passed, then another, and then, on an unremarkable Tuesday, I got a small package in the mail, no return address, just my name, written in that same unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was Kayla's class ring, scorched around the edges like it had been caught in a fire, and a note that simply said, "You were never the problem, but we both paid the price." I don't know where she is. I don't know if she'll ever come back. But I do know this. Sometimes the strongest revenge is letting the truth breathe and watching everyone who doubted you choke on it.